IB Nation, college football fans all over the country, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Thursday, December 5th. That's Bill Bender from Sporting News. You guys can find him at BillBender92 on Twitter. And, of course, all his written content you can find at sportingnews.com. Well, Bill, we don't have a Notre Dame game to preview this weekend because Notre Dame is not playing for a conference championship, but Notre Dame's standing could be impacted by what happens this weekend, and the college football playoff overall, the teams that are in and the order of the teams that are in certainly will be impacted by games that happen this weekend. And so we are going to preview this weekend's 4 conference championship games at the Power 4 level. We're also going to look at the 2 top group of 5 conference champions, which play Friday night, which was, I think, the coaches may not like it. I think it's smart to play those games on Friday night for if you're talking about it from a commissioner standpoint who's trying to continue to market your league. So we'll talk about those, and I actually think the Mountain West game could end up being one of the more entertaining games of the weekend. So we'll preview all those. But, Bill, before we begin, just if you want to take a chance to kind of share with the Irish Breakdown people just your overall thoughts of where the rankings stand going into championship weekend as we get ready for these games.
They're fine. I expected Alabama to be ranked ahead of Miami, and if you talk about strength of schedule, they should be. I mean, that was one debate. As that ranking show was getting ready to start, I heard a couple analysts say, Miami will be ahead of Alabama, and here's why, and it was mostly just 10 wins. But no, Alabama has a better resume. I really don't have a problem with it.
That was my issue, Bill. So I'm trying to debate this with you because I've already debated it enough.
I'm sure
I thought Miami should have been ahead of Alabama. I didn't think that they would be. But the argument that I heard from some analysts on ESPN that it's just because one team's 10-2 and the other's 9-3 was one of the laziest, worst arguments that you can make.
It's not enough.
It's ridiculous. It's like, okay, if that's the case, then we should say, so should Army be ranked ahead of Alabama and Miami? They're 10-1. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a lazy argument to make. It's like there is a case to be made for Miami. You may not accept it, but there's one to be made. That is a bad one.
Make it real quick.
That to me is a bad one.
Make it like if we were in a Few Good Men scene, you get to be Kevin Bacon. So make your Miami case to me really quickly.
My Miami case is really more about, I think that Miami is a team that has better losses than Alabama. And the Alabama losses, it's more so I don't like Alabama's resume more than I love Miami.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it boils down to for me. I actually said if you wanted to make a case instead of Miami, I would make a South Carolina argument if you didn't like the Miami argument. So it's not so much pro-Miami because Miami's 10-2. They don't have any great wins. I think the Duke win should be given more credence because I think Duke's got quality wins, but they have really good losses. And that 9-3, any 9-3 team in the SEC is ranked in the top 25, including a Missouri team that has no business being in the top 25, in my opinion. So I think that props up Bama a little artificially compared to Miami because of the arbitrary nature of the rankings. But it's more so Bama has to me, a bad resume.
Right. And
they've got the win over Georgia. That was it was a quality win simply from the standpoint of on paper as a quality win. Any other team blows a 28-point lead like that, they're going to get hammered. If Notre Dame would have blown a 28 lead like that to anybody, it would be viewed differently, for example, than what it is being done with Alabama. And my issue is more of Alabama getting a ton of benefit of the doubt. And they talk about bad losses, and they compare Miami's bad losses. And you can say, well, Miami lost by 5 at a Georgia Tech team who lost to Notre Dame, lost to Louisville, lost to Georgia in 8 overtimes. They lost to a 9-3 Syracuse team on the road that is now ranked. None of those compare to losing to Oklahoma by 21. It's not just Oklahoma. It's and you got dominated for 60 minutes. It's not just losing by 5 at Vanderbilt. It's you never led. You got controlled. They were up by double digits most of the game. A couple good Saturdays does not trump an overall not good resume. And the reality is this: if you'd have flipped the losses, so Miami loses in game 11 and then to Syracuse, and then beats Wake in game 12, but Bama beats Auburn in game 11, but loses to Oklahoma in game 12, there's no way they're putting Alabama in the playoff.
Right.
sort of the issue I have. And then I also thought Ward Manuel's comments about, well, they've lost 2 out of 3 were pretty ignorant and against what the committee says the rankings are about, which is looking at the entirety. When you lose should not matter. And he basically said it does, when in the past the committee has said it doesn't.
Well,
there's a lot of inconsistency, so it's a process problem, and I just don't think Alabama is one of the 12 best teams in college football this year.
Right. That was a lot longer than Jack Ross's monologue.
You asked me for a short answer. Did you really think that was going to happen?
I am hoping you've seen A Few Good Men at least. I'm hoping.
I've seen that movie. I mean, the question is more of, have you seen it this week?
I know.
That's more of a fair question, Bill.
I'm pretty sure I've watched that movie 300 times. And then I
watched it a week ago.
It was on AMC a week ago. I've watched at least half of it. And then I DVR'd it. And Kimberly asked me, why is A Few Good Men on the DVR? And I said, I want to see how it ends. So for the 300th time. Anyway.
It never gets old. It never gets old.
So the comebacker here with Alabama, and this is what's sticking with it. You got a point about the losses. You know, Georgia Tech and Syracuse have a combined record of 16-8. Their losses aren't horrible. You know, they make them out to be because of the ACC. Their losses aren't bad. So I buy that argument. And if you want to push on, I think Alabama's biggest black eye is the Oklahoma loss. It's not just a loss. It's horrible.
Right.
They were, I watched the second half of that game. They didn't look like a Birmingham Bowl team, let alone a playoff team. So,
and that was 2 weeks ago.
That said, I wasn't surprised. I had it built into my content that they were going to be ranked ahead of them. And I do take some, like, you look at the cumulative opponent record and you take out Florida A&M, Miami's opponents are 66 and 66. And then Alabama's would be, I think we put that down, 92 and 52. They do have better wins. They do have a better resume as it pertains to the college football playoff. Does a 3-loss team deserve to be an over a 2-loss team? It's really closer than it's closer than they made it out to be.
That premise I don't spend any time with.
Which one?
Because should a 3 be over a 2? And,
I don't either.
My answer is a 4 should be an over a 2 if it's overall they have a better resume. You know,
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if Georgia would have gone 9-3, I'd be having a different conversation right now.
Right.
Because of the overall quality of their schedule, the type of losses they have. Like, let's say Georgia would have lost in overtime to Georgia Tech. I'd say, oh, you know what? You look at that schedule. Should they be in the playoff? Yes, they should be in the playoff. Should they be hosting? Definitely not. But because of the overall quality of their resume, I don't think Bama's resume is as strong as. I mean, and part of it is, people want to, not give credit for when you beat a good group of 5 team or you lose to a group of 5 team. But if you're going to look at Alabama's overall resume, that's pumped up by a couple of their group of 5 opponents that have very strong records. Western Kentucky's got a strong record that along those lines. So that's kind of how I look at it. But what we do agree on, Bill, no question, I expected Alabama to be in. That's no doubt. I knew they were going to screw the ACC again. If you're going to screw over 13-0 Florida State last year, there was no way 10-2 Miami was going to get in. And I think that's part of the reason they didn't put Louisville into the top 25. And that's why they didn't put Duke into the top 25. Is because if you put those teams justifiably in the top 25, I made this case last night on the show, 8-4 Louisville should be in the top 25 over 9-3 Missouri.
For sure.
9-3 Duke should be in the top 25 over 9-3 Missouri. But you do that, now all of a sudden your case against Miami gets weakened. And that was sort of my so it's a process issue as much as anything.
Both teams did play an FCS team. Both teams did. So Miami played Florida A&M. Not a game that really counts on the schedule. But I don't know.
Well, Mercer's a better FCS team than
correct. So
but
who cares? They're going to lose.
None of those games should count.
Right. Yeah. And Alabama had a stronger non-con schedule, sort of. It's close, but I just think they were going to win that argument anyway. And you can say it's brand and it's their helmet. And I mean, if we're being honest about it, if I was behind the scenes, unlike A Few Good Men, I would have gone behind the scenes with the judge and said, hey, by the way, we have a red helmet with a number on it, and it's going to do well against that gold helmet or that white helmet with the blue stripe or that
on
silver
Friday
helmet.
night.
Or that silver helmet with all the Buckeye leaves on it. It'll do just fine for TV. Oh, really? That's nice. We're in. So But I don't know. We got a lot of ground to cover. Maybe we should jump into some of these conference championship games.
Definitely. Wanted to point out one final thing. They did have a common opponent in the non-conference. Alabama beat South Florida 42-16 at home, and Miami beat South Florida 50-15 on the road. So there was that data point that nobody talks about either. So just wanted to throw that out there. So Bill, let's dive into the conference championship games. That was a fun discussion. Let's dive into this one because I think this is going to be this is going to be a very entertaining conference championship games. And what I'm not sure of, Bill, is my feeling based on that I actually like these matchups, or is it because of, for the first time in a long time, all of them except the AAC are going to have an impact on who plays for a championship? Like would I care about SMU versus Clemson if it wasn't a 12-team playoff? I wonder if that's kind of messed with my head a little bit.
The trade-off is I don't really care about the SEC and Big Ten as much. And I've seen Georgia and Texas, and we may see Georgia and Texas a third time. I just know, like, it takes some of it off for me that the SEC and the Big Ten are both not in the playoff. Right? They've got all their teams in the playoff already. The SEC has 2 teams in the playoff. The Big Ten has 2 teams in the playoff, and that makes it a little bit easier for me to. I thought you disappeared. Sorry, on the monitor. I'm like, I'm not doing this by myself. I need a coach.
We're having some construction done in our house, which I'm not thrilled about because we had a flood a few weeks ago, and I had left one of the. There's like a big sheet blocking my desk from all the work being done, and I had left the thing open, and it was creating an echo.
Yeah. I'm like,
I just go quickly.
You left me. Anyway, SEC teams are in, Big Ten teams are in. It takes some of the shine off those games for me because it's more about seeding. But trade-off, I'm going to sit down and enjoy the Mountain West Conference Championship game. Yeah, I'm going to sit and watch. Big 12 should be fun. And then the ACC at the end of the night, that is like the only chaotic piece because the rest of the field is pretty much set. It really is going to come down to Clemson wins, SMU and Alabama becomes a thing. SMU wins. We already know the 12 teams by then. Right. So, it should make for a fun weekend. It's not the same, though, as how do I put it? It's not the same with 12. It's probably a little bit better. Like last year, though, when we had 4, was there a game last year? I think Georgia, Alabama was the one where Washington, Oregon. We had 2 where, winner gets in. And, you have to have that to make for a good conference championship.
And then going into the ACC championship, there was the notion of if Louisville can knock off Florida State, that opens up a path for,
Alabama until it did it anyway.
Yeah.
So, but we don't have to relive that. We've spent a lot of airtime doing that.
Yeah. So let's start off with this Mountain West game, Bill, because this is going to be a very intriguing game, in my opinion. And what we do know about the college football playoff, and I think you'd agree with this, is 11 of the 12 slots are decided. Correct. In that there's going to be a Big 12 champ, there's going to be an ACC team, there's going to be a Mountain West team, right? It's which one of those teams. And as you mentioned, there's really only one game that's being played this weekend that could knock a team currently in out other than that team simply being replaced by the team that beat them, meaning like a team that's sitting at home could get knocked out by what happens this weekend. There's only one game that does that, as you mentioned, the ACC. But these other games are going to determine – some of these other games are going to determine who's in. That's what's unique about Mountain West, which we're going to start off with, and then the ACC at the end. So you've got number 20 UNLV and number 10 Boise State. And I've heard some comments lately from the Big 12 about how could a group of 5 team be in over a higher rank than a Big 12 team. And I'm like, well, one of the teams playing this weekend did go 2-0 against your league, including going on the road and beating Kansas this past weekend. And they also beat Houston by 20, who knocked off one of your teams earlier this month, right? They knocked off Kansas State. So that kind of factors into it. But these are not your typical, Bill, in my opinion, your typical group of 5 teams. And I think we're going to start seeing more of this because of the transfer portal. You're going to see some Power 5 guys going to schools like this, and these teams become a lot more competitive. UNLV comes into this game, Bill, 10-2. Their 2 losses were a 3-point home loss to a top 25 Syracuse team and a 5-point home loss to Boise State. Boise State comes in 11-1. They're ranked 10th. Their only loss being a 3-point road loss at Oregon. And then, of course, beat UNLV earlier in the season. 4-point spread. Boise's favored by 4. 57.5 is the over-under. The game is being played Friday night at 8 o'clock on Fox in Idaho. So don't do what I did my freshman year of college. When you see the blue field, your screen is not messed up. You don't need to alter the color. I actually did that my freshman year of college, Bill. When I went off to college, we had bought a TV at a garage sale, and it was the first time I'd ever actually watched a Boise State game on TV. And I thought my monitor, man, this stupid TV they bought me is a piece of crap. The TV's blue. So I'm trying to mess with the color, and then I realized, it's actually you're muted. It's actually blue.
Had to adjust the knob behind if you have one of those TVs where you were like turning like a safe.
No, it was actually one of those ones. It was one of the first that you could actually like kind of do it where you had to like move the brightness up and down and all that. It was actually kind of one of those deals.
So fancy. Gonna be a fun game. Boise State, Ashton Jeanty, he'll probably get 30 more carries here. It comes down to, Haj Malik Williams has been good. Or Malik Haj Williams, he's been good all since he took over for Sluka and the drama there. And, Barry Odom has done a nice job. This was a game in the fourth quarter, the first time they play. I do think there's a difference when you put this game in Boise, though, and the home field advantage that comes with that. Maddox Matson's a lot better at home than he is on the road, and I think that is a difference maker. 15 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 165 passer rating at home for him. And that's huge. It's really different than road. Now, UNLV has a dude, too, that we don't talk about enough. Ricky White's a dude, NFL dude, going to play on Sunday for a long time. And I think it'll be a good game for a half, but I could see Boise State. They're kind of weird team spread-wise to pick because the week you pick them to cover, they screw around and vice versa. I think they win this game by 10 points. Got it 31-21. And Bill, my podcast partner, Trochi, he liked UNLV here. He thinks they're going to win outright.
One thing I'll say about Boise State, Bill, is they tend to be up for the games that they need to be up for, and then they will play down to some teams that maybe they should have, like Wyoming a couple weeks ago, right? But, they beat Washington State by 21. They beat UNLV on the road. They beat San Jose State by 21. That was a game that a lot of people are looking at like, hey, this could get a little tricky. I think we even mentioned that in our show because San Jose State's a good football team. And then they beat Oregon State convincing this past weekend. I do like this UNLV football team, but look, this is we talk a lot about the SEC schools coming up north. It's 68 degrees right now in Las Vegas, Nevada, and it's 32 degrees in Boise, Idaho. On Friday night, it is expected to be 68 degrees in Las Vegas, and it's going to be 34 degrees on Friday night in Boise, Idaho. Those things matter for those teams as well, and that's going to factor into it. What I'm curious to see, Bill, is I thought UNLV had one of the best defensive game plans for Jeanty this season. He went for 128 yards, but he did on 30. They made 33 carries. They made him earn everything he got. Can Maddox Madsen do more to kind of protect him in this game? He made some throws in that game. A couple times he had some opportunities, couldn't make it. Can they handle that? Can they keep Ricky White in check like they did last time? 5 catches for 57 yards. Can they prevent Haj Malik Williams from going off like he did last time? Because they did allow him to go for over 100 yards in scrambles in that game. Those are really the matchups for me is can Boise State find a game plan that's going to take advantage of what UNLV is going to try to do to them to stop Ashton Jeanty, who steps up for Boise, and then the same thing for UNLV. Can they replicate that plan they had last time, and who steps up to really to win this game? Because you have to think that Boise's going to say, hey, we're not going to let Ricky White beat us, and you have to think that UNLV is going to say we're going to try to do everything we can to make Ashton Jeanty can't beat us. So which team supporting cast steps up? I think that's what this game's going to really be about, Bill. The only reason I have any hesitation to pick Boise, and I'm going with Boise, but the only reason I have hesitation is because I do believe it's hard to beat teams twice. It can be done. We've seen it, right? We saw Oklahoma beat TCU twice a few years ago in the Big 12. We saw Utah beat Oregon twice to win the Pac-12. We saw them beat USC twice to win the Pac-12. Doesn't happen a ton, though, especially when you have two teams that are somewhat close. That's my only hesitation, but I do think, as you mentioned, the fact that this isn't a neutral field game, this is going to be at Boise. is why I like the Broncos in this game. I think it's going to be a hard-fought, low-scoring game, similar to last time, even less. I'm going 24-20 Broncos in this game.
I had 31-21. So that would mean that Boise clinches the 4 seed essentially. Mm-hmm. Maybe higher if Clemson wins. But they'll get a first-round bye. That's not going to sit well with people, but this is a team that played well against Oregon, and I think it's fitting in some ways, this team that didn't get a shot in the BCS era with some of its really good teams. And it's kind of been that group of 5 school that we've all pointed to when you think about group of 5 Buster gets the first crack at it. I don't mind it at all.
Yeah. Well, here's what's helps them, in my opinion. I think normally I would agree that a group of 5 team shouldn't have a bye normally, but you can't have it as a hard and fast rule because, number one, there's a chance that, honestly, the Big 12 and the ACC champ won't be deserving of a bye compared to what they've done. And the fact is they've played 3 teams that were Power 5 teams a year ago. And I think you have to look at that. Washington State still has a Power 5 roster. Oregon State still has a Power 5 roster. And then they played Oregon. They went 2-1 in those games. They beat Washington State by 3 touchdowns. They beat Oregon State by 16, and then they took Oregon down to the wire. So I think they've kind of shown, hey, we are that good of it. We are that kind of team. And I think in this instance, I'm totally fine with a group of 5 team getting a bye week because I don't know that you could say that the Big 12 teams are better than Boise State. I don't think you can say Clemson should be in there over a 12-1 Boise State team. So if Boise wins, now if UNLV wins, then I think that's where we could see a bit of a shakeup in that I think that bumps the either Clemson or the Big 12 chance. Like you could see a scenario, Bill, if UNLV wins where Clemson and the Big 12 both jump into the bye round, because obviously that would knock Boise out of and so the Big 12 would take their place. And because Clemson is ranked ahead of UNLV, I think they would be ranked ahead of UNLV if they both pull off upsets. So that's one of the few things that could really shake up the seeding, not who's in, but the seeding is if UNLV beats Boise State. I think that would you agree that the Big 12 jumps up to 3 if UNLV and Clemson both pull off upsets this weekend?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and that obviously could happen. I don't think Clemson, I think they can win, but I don't know that they'll get a bye the more I think about it, because the Big 12 will get a bye and Boise would get a bye at that point.
No, if UNLV wins. If UNLV and Clemson win, I'm saying that's what could really shake up, because now you'd have 2 byes. You'd have the Big 12 and Clemson would then jump into the bye round because Clemson's ahead of UNLV right now, correct?
Yes. So
right,
but we'll see. Like I mean, they have to argue that, and they'd probably argue their way to put Clemson ahead of them. Ahead
of who?
UNLV, right?
Yeah, but I thought Clemson was already ranked ahead of them
by 2 spots, right? So 3. Yeah. So either way, that's fine. Sorry, I got confused with this one.
No,
but
what I'm saying is if UNLV and Clemson both pull off upsets this weekend, then that shakes up the bye round, because now the ACC team that was going to be 3 now falls out. Clemson jumps into 4. I think the Big 12 team jumps into that 3rd spot, and then UNLV would be 12.
Correct. Right. That is all correct. That all checks out. Sorry, I have to write this out as we say it.
It gets confusing, dude, especially since it's the first year we've had to do this stuff.
Right.
An ACC team still gets a bye, but it's a different caliber.
Now, if SMU wins and UNLV wins, we go SMU 3, Arizona State 4.
Right.
Or Iowa State, and then UNLV goes down to 12. UNLV will be 12 if they win. How about that? Let's eliminate all the confusion.
There you go. There they go. So you have Boise winning 31-21. I'm going 24-20. Let's just quickly talk about the AAC real quick. You've got Tulane and Army. This is an interesting one because I wonder if Tulane clinching as early as they did played a big role in the AAC now having no shot to get a team in. Because I do wonder if Tulane wouldn't have clinched as early as they did, would they have gone into the Memphis game the way that they did? They just look like a different team. They didn't look as locked in. They didn't look like our backs are against the wall. And just really got whooped for because if they would have won that game, Bill, we're having a very interesting conversation right now about the possibility of the Mountain West and the AAC getting in if Clemson were to upset SMU, because you know what I mean? Like, it would get really interesting, interesting.
Right. Yeah, and it took the
or
loss
if
for us
Iowa
this
State
game.
would have won by that too, because Tulane would have been ahead of Iowa State had they not lost to Memphis.
Right. Yeah, and it would be a fun game. Good spot for Army, and they do have one loss, which is, you think if UNLV wins and Army wins, is that a debate? I mean, Army's only loss is to Notre Dame.
That's right.
It's not like they played a bad team. So,
Right.
But I think they don't want to even entertain the argument of they've got to go play Navy.
And 100%. You put them in and then they lose the next week.
Right.
And I can't blame them for that, Bill, especially since Army doesn't have a really – like what UNLV can point to is, yeah, we have more losses. We lost to a group of a Power 5 team and Boise. You only played one Group of 5 team or one Power 5 team, and they smoked you, whereas UNLV played 3.
Right.
And that's the difference, is they played 3 Group of 5 team or Power 5 teams, beat 2 of them, and the other one was a 3-point loss to a top 25 team, where Army's like, our resume is literally built on just one good loss.
Right.
That's it.
No,
so I don't blame them for having a 2-loss unit. That's why we talked about earlier, Bill. Just looking at resumes 10-1 versus 10-2 doesn't really tell you who's the better team or who's more deserving. That's why I thought the 2 versus 3, just saying, well, they have 2, they have 3. That's a lazy argument because it doesn't tell you anything about the quality of those teams or the quality of the teams that they played.
Nope. And, the other wrinkle here is John Summerall, North Carolina's kicking around on him, and they should because he's a really good coach. So then that always factors into 1 or 2 of these Group of 5 championship games at the end of the year anyway. So keep an eye on that. John Summerall, I think he crushed it. North Carolina, he crushed it at Troy's, crushed it at Tulane, and that could be a factor. I like Army to win. I think Army wins, and, good story for them going into the Navy game, and great season. And again, their only penalty is they stepped out and played Notre Dame.
Freaking Miami killed them because that game was supposed to be Miami, and Miami backed out, and Notre Dame scheduled Army to replace Miami. And so had they not done that, Army may be sitting here 11-0 and having a conversation about should we be the 5th team in. For Notre Dame, Bill, obviously Army winning this game helps Notre Dame, in my opinion, because if you get into any kind of debate of Notre Dame versus Penn State, this could be something that some people could use to say, well, look, overall resume, losses, all this kind of stuff. So it does have I think it could have a small impact on it. So let's dive into the Power 4 conference championships, Bill. And let's start off in the Big 12. You've got Iowa State playing Arizona State. The game is going to be played in AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. The Sun Devils come in as a really hot team and also 2-point favorites. Now, they will be out without Jordan Tyson for this game, their stud receiver. So that's going to be interesting to see. But they are winners of 5 straight games. Interestingly, Bill, they have been a team that really shook up their league. At first, it looked like they were going to knock some teams out, and then they kept winning, and then they ended up knocking other teams out and themselves in. They beat Kansas State on the road by 10 recently. They beat BYU, which helped them get on the verge of earning a spot, and then blew out their rival Arizona to earn the spot. Winners of 5 in a row. Iowa State looked like they were done, Bill. Back-to-back losses in November to start November to Texas Tech at home, lost the next week to Kansas, and then the last 3 weeks they have wins over Cincinnati, Utah, and Kansas State, and it really just came down to other teams getting beat, and it just kind of allowed them to just keep creeping back up and getting into this one. They've won their last 3 games. Interesting matchup. I was a little surprised that Arizona State was only a 2-point favorite when you look at how these two teams are coming into this game. But it's going to be noon on Saturday on ABC. What are your thoughts on this game, Bill?
Yeah, I like Arizona State to win. Churchy liked Iowa State. He thinks they're going to slow them down. The Jordan Tyson injury matters. Sam Levitt's played really well. They've got the running back, Cam Scatterby. They're that hot team. They're what Arizona was last year. They're a team I just don't want to mess with. And, I think they end up winning this game. Good on them. They're the first we'll see a theme with this today, the team that comes into the new conference and takes care of business. And like you said, they went from spoiler to hottest team in the country. And at the end of this, Notre Dame fans should pay attention and watch. I would watch this game because you're probably going to see them in the first round.
Good chance. Interesting teaser to what we're going to talk about at the end.
You may just see them, and they may have to bring their winter coats, but this is a team worth watching. And Kenny Dillingham Kurt Signetti probably has that Coach of the Year thing wrapped up in most publications, I would imagine. But Kenny Dillingham deserves to be every bit in that conversation because he's going to get that team that was a larger mess in some ways than Indiana into the college football playoff. I think the difference is their offense is a little more potent. Iowa State's run defense is not that great, and that will open up things for Sam Levitt as long as they don't turn the ball over and succumb to the weirdness that can happen in the Big 12 championship game. They'll be fine.
You look at this Iowa State run defense, Bill, as you mentioned, they gave up 204 to Iowa. They gave up 354 to UCF. They gave up 237 to Kansas, 287 to Cincinnati. Did a nice job last week against Kansas State, but that Kansas State team was just not playing good football at the end of the year. You had Cam Scattaboo, who's had a phenomenal year. He's got 1,398 yards, 17 touchdowns. Got slowed down by an injury. Didn't play against UCF, the one game that they've played where they were against a not very good team that they didn't whoop. Recently, they lost. They won that game by 4. He didn't play. He did not play well against Kansas State. They bottled him up pretty good. Didn't look 100%. Last 2 weeks, he's gotten back to looking more like what we saw before the injury. The last 2 weeks, he went for $147 against BYU and 177 last week against Arizona, 8.4 per carry, had 3 touchdowns in both games. So I think the other thing you talk about too is obviously I think Iowa State's got the better quarterback in this game with Rocco Beck. The difference is I think Sam Levitt's a good football player and has a better supporting cast around him even without Jordan Tyson. I just don't think this is a good matchup for Iowa State. I could be wrong. I just don't think this is a good matchup for them. I think it's going to be a competitive game. I like Arizona State in this game, though. I think their defense is opportunistic. I think Iowa State has slightly better defense, but I think that Arizona State matches up pretty well against what they do. And I like the Sun Devils winning this game. What was your score prediction, Bill? I got 27-20.
31-24.
Okay, so we're close.
Yeah, and the Big 12 championship game is normally pretty entertaining one-score type game.
Yeah.
I'd make sure I can back that up. But I just remember the Baylor,
the great game in 2021 with Baylor and Oklahoma State.
Baylor, that's the one that always comes to mind first because they should have scored.
Yeah, didn't you have one between Baylor and Oklahoma recently, right?
4 of the last 5 have been one-score games. Last year, Texas, Oklahoma State, not so much, but we knew Texas was the better team there. But the last 4 before that, I mean, Kansas State, TCU, and TCU lost and then went to a national championship game. So, this will be a good game. I do, and I'm looking forward to it. But I like the Sun Devils to get it done at Jerry World and clinch their number. And that would – I'll wait. But, that clinches them a playoff spot. We can start there.
Iowa State was in it in 2020, lost to Oklahoma 27-21. It was the year before 2019 is when Oklahoma beat Baylor. That was the game I was thinking of, which was a very good game. It was a Matt Rule team, I believe, against Jalen Hurts. So very interesting game. So touchdown game in that. This game, the only impact this game has on the college football playoff is the winners in, the losers out. That's really it. And they aren't really in control of their own destiny as far as moving up. They would need another upset. Now, if there is an upset, if UNLV wins or if Clemson wins, I do think that this would vault the Big 12 or should vault the Big 12 into a bye, a first-round bye, which could still matter for Notre Dame, Bill. If Notre Dame gets 5 and they beat 12, then they would then, I think, likely have a shot to play the Arizona State team. Or if they're jump all the way up to a 3 seed, if there is chaos this weekend and Notre Dame's still 6, then they would have a chance to play them. So there's a decent chance the winner of this game Notre Dame is going to have a shot to play them either in round 1 or in the quarterfinals in some different scenarios. So should make that game very interesting. Let's go into the Big Ten, Bill. I think this is the game that has the least intrigue in regard to there's no shakeup that's going to happen in the college football playoff of our who's in or who's out. All it impacts is seeding. So you've got number 1 Oregon, who has, to me, been the number 1 team in the country for a while now. They've played they've good wins, have handled business the way they need to handle business. When they don't play well, they still come out with W's, which we saw against Wisconsin. 12-0 coming in this game. Number 3 Penn State, 11-1. Oregon's a 3.5-point favorite, which I found interesting. This game will be at 8:00 on Saturday night on CBS inside Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. The one interesting part about this, Bill, is we have talked all year about how teams have not performed well, including Oregon at times, when they have to travel all the way across to the east or all the way out west. Penn State, this is a normal Big Ten trip for them, going from Pennsylvania to Indianapolis. For Oregon, you're coming from Eugene to Indianapolis, completely different weather environment to come into, although that won't really impact the game because it will be an indoor stadium. So what are your overall thoughts about this game, Bill? Thoughts on the spread? Thoughts on the matchup? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, opportunity for Penn State here. This wasn't the Big Ten championship game a lot of people expected. Two really good defenses, too. Penn State only allows 14 points a game. Oregon is shade ahead of that at 16.2. The Ducks, I got kind of not ripped, but corrected earlier this week when I said Oregon didn't really have a blip this season. They were trying to say, well, Wisconsin was a blip. Kind of. They won the game. Right. They went into Madison and won at night, so it's not a blip if you win. I think Oregon's just kind of called their shot. It started, I was at Big Ten Media Day. They put that duck on the Indianapolis River. Lanning came in not acting like, oh, I'm so in awe of the Big Ten. And, you look at those banners, and this is the first time since 2016 that neither Ohio State nor Michigan will win this. And Penn State was the last team to do it. So tremendous opportunity for James Franklin here. Yeah, Ohio State won 17, 18, 19, 20. Michigan won 21, 22, 23.
Wow.
Been a while.
I mean, I remember that game in 16 as well. That was a game where Penn State made a huge second half comeback to win that
Great game.
Yeah. I'm looking at it right here. Wow, that's pretty wild.
Great game, and I was there, and I just remember that game didn't end up impacting the playoff picture because Penn State didn't get in. And now you get a chance to get in. Now James Franklin can erase the narrative about the big game.
Mm-hmm.
0-5 as an underdog since 22, maybe 2020, something like that. I have that in one of my stories this week. 0-5 straight up as an underdog since 2022. Most of those are Michigan and Ohio State. This is Oregon. They'll have to do. I think it's going to be an entertaining, close game. Penn State's defensive front, if Drew Aller doesn't turn the ball over, it's going to be a close game. If he does, because Dylan Gabriel doesn't turn the ball over, Oregon could win in or out.
Well, of course, as soon as you say that, that's going to impact the game, of course. Thing I like about Oregon in this matchup, Bill, is their run defense has really improved a lot for me this season. I think that's gotten a lot better. Obviously, you could say, well, they did give up a lot to Ashton Genty, and kind of everybody gives up a lot to Ashton Genty, you know what I mean?
But use that one.
Yeah, like they shut down Oregon State's run game. Purdue ran for a lot for them, but Purdue is one of the weirdest teams I've ever seen, Bill, because Purdue this season actually had some really strong rushing performances, and then everything else was garbage. This is one of the craziest stat lines I've ever seen in my life. Purdue's 4 highest rushing games: 248, 263, 239 against Illinois, and 208 against Oregon. And their next highest game after that is 99 yards against Wisconsin. In 12 games, they went for over 200 yards 4 times. They were at under 100 in the other 8. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. And it also explains why Ryan Walters is currently unemployed, because that's just weird. But I think Oregon's got a solid run defense. I think they've got a quality athletic secondary. I just don't know if Penn State's going to have to establish the run against this defense, because if this is a game about Drew Aller sitting back in the pocket and having to pick them apart, Oregon's smart enough to say, we're actually going to have a game plan for Tyler Warren, which USC did not have. You're going to have to beat us with somebody else. And can they do that? Can they run the ball well enough to take the pressure off of him? I mean, we'll see about all those things. I look at it, Bill, and I like this Penn State defense in a lot of ways, but I do think they've been vulnerable at times to teams that can just run right at them. And I think Oregon has a unique scheme because they can run right at you, but they also do a lot with speed, working sort of laterally outside zones and counters and things like that. Their run game isn't dominant, but it's good when they can really get it going. That's going to be the key. You want to know one of the reasons Wisconsin was able to stay in that game? They took the run game away. You want to know one of the reasons why that they could, they didn't really blow Purdue out the way that other teams have. Couldn't get the run game going. And that's really been their issue, is when they can't get the run game going, they're vulnerable. And now it's all on Dylan Gabriel's shoulders, because I think Dylan Gabriel's a much better quarterback when he is complementing the run game, as opposed to you've got to sit him back and he's got to carry the team. And that's one of the reasons I don't know that Oregon can go on a run all the way to a championship, but it's in the regular season, it's been good enough for them to get it done. So I do think this is a matchup to me that, and honestly, what's not talked about enough? What's not talked about enough is Dan Lanning's struggles in big games as well like this. Yes, he has the Ohio State win, but in a lot of these other games in his 3 years, they have not fared as well. You talk about last year losing twice to Washington with a lot on the line. You go back to his first year and some of the losses they had there, losing to Oregon State late in the season, losing to Washington again, and then, of course, getting blown out by Georgia. The only really, good win that he has, in my opinion, was this year beating Ohio State. I mean, that's really it. So he still has a lot to prove as well, in my opinion, and I think he's getting a little bit of a pass for not being a big game coach.
He gets a pass because the media loves him because he goes for it on fourth down. And he's super aggressive and young. I mean, I always make the comparison Dan Campbell with the Lions. Everybody loves Dan Campbell, so except for me, not tonight, not with Green Bay, but he gets passed for making bad decisions and not winning games. And Dan Campbell's won a little bit more than Dan Lanning, but the comparison is apt to me. So, I got Oregon winning by 10. It could be worse.
I'm going to hold on to that one here for a second, Bill, because I'm going to ask you a follow-up to that question when we get to the final section of the show. So what's your score? You have 10-point win. What's your score?
31-21, but I know what the follow-up is, and we'll get to that when we get to the end.
I have it actually a little bit more. I have it 27-17 is what I have it. So we have it a similar 10-point game. I actually do think Penn State's defense is good enough to keep them under 30. I'm not saying they'll definitely do that. The other concern I have for Penn State is when Oregon has an aggressive early pass attack, their offense can get rolling. And I do think that Penn State's secondary can be vulnerable to the speed of Oregon's offense, much like Ohio State was. So that's going to be an interesting part of it as well, which is why Abdul Carter could be the guy that it has the biggest impact on this game. If he can get to Dylan Gabriel early and force some mistakes, that could be what helps Oregon. Him and their D tackle. So let's get into this SEC championship game, Bill. Number 5 Georgia against number 2 Texas. I actually think there could be a little bit more of a shakeup if the unranked team wins this one. So if Penn State beats Oregon, I think we know what the seeding is going to be. Penn State's going to jump up either 1 or 2, and then Oregon's going to fall down to 5. That's kind of the worst case scenario there for the Big Ten. In this instance, I think this could have more of an impact on other teams if Georgia pulls off the upset, which we can talk about. But you got number 5 Georgia, comes in 10-2. One of their 10 wins was at Texas over the Longhorns, 30-15. Number 2 Texas comes in 11-1, with obviously their only loss being to Georgia. And this game is going to be at 4:00 on ABC, Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. So it's in Georgia's backyard, literally in their backyard. When I fly into Atlanta to drive to Clemson, you get right outside of Atlanta and you see signs for Athens, Georgia. This is a hop and a skip away from Athens. Texas, however, still a 2.5-point favorite. Bill, let's talk about it. Let's talk about this rematch game.
Yeah, I think Texas will find out what they learned. I think Texas is a better team. I know they lost the first matchup, but I think they've been the more consistent team. I've been higher on Texas than most people. I know they had just 29 rushing yards in the first meeting. That's going to change, and I think Quintravion Wisner will change that. Kelvin Banks, I haven't checked today to see if there's any status update on him. If they don't have him, that's a big deal. Lombardi Award winner, probably, at least a finalist for that, along with Will Campbell and a couple others. But yeah, I mean, Georgia got after them, and I think that first game they were kind of stunned because Georgia came out of the tunnel ready to go, and that was Georgia's best home run swing, and then they settled in, and it was a ball game. Quinn Ewers or Carson Beck, who do you trust more? I don't know. Like that can change.
Not an easy answer, yeah.
That can change by the series, and this Texas defense allowed 9.3 points per game in November. They're playing ball. They've got difference makers on every level of that defense. I think they're the best team in the country in some ways. And
talking about Texas?
Yes, I do. They're complete. And they lost to Georgia. That's not a blip when we were talking about that earlier. That's losing to a good team.
Right.
And I think they learned from it. Now, the external factor is you got to go to Atlanta to do it. And that's a lot to ask because that's a virtual home game for Georgia. And, but, the winner here is going to be number 2, no matter what.
So, well, I think the winner here could be 1 if other things happen. I think Texas would be ahead of Penn State if Penn State pulls off that upset. But, Bill, this is an intriguing game for me. You and I talked a lot about this game when we previewed it earlier in the season. And there was 2 things that we brought up. We both like Texas. We both like Texas to win. I think we both had them like they were clearly going to be the better team. But there were 2 caveats that we brought up. I believe you brought up the one of them that turned out to be really spot on, which is Kirby tends to get his teams up for these type of disrespect games, right?
Yep.
They're not respecting us. And it turned out to be true in that instance. The one that I brought up was I'm concerned how this game is going to be for Texas because they haven't been challenged yet. Coming into that game, they played Colorado State, Michigan, who ended up we knew by then wasn't that good, UTSA, Louisiana Monroe, Mississippi State, and a bad Oklahoma team.
They got challenged last week.
No. Going into the first Georgia game.
Okay. Before that
was the thing we brought up that we were concerned about going into that matchup was Georgia's already played some battles, right? Georgia had already played Clemson by then. Georgia had already played Alabama by then. They had a hard-fought 13-12 ugly win over Kentucky. They were more battle-tested. And I think it proved to be true. That's a big reason why I think Georgia did come out early and was able to kind of swarm Texas. Well, since that game, Texas, as you mentioned, had played a really hard-fought game at Vanderbilt. They had a battle against Arkansas. The game last weekend at Texas A&M that's a good football team. They had to go on the road and play in a very loud environment. And I think this Texas team is not going to be as unprepared for the speed of the game or the crowd that is not that then as it was for the speed of the game before, or maybe what the crowd environment would be if they hadn't just come from Kyle Field, which everybody always tells us it's one of what it was last week. It was the stadium du jour for the people that want to say it's the hardest place to win, right? It's like they pick a different SEC home stadium every week.
It was Arkansas there for a few weeks.
It was Arkansas. It was Tiger Stadium. And when Notre Dame was going to play, it was Kyle Field. So, but I think this Texas team is a little bit more battle tested. And I think Georgia, honestly, Bill, is reeling a little bit. They just haven't played great. I mean, in their last 4 games, actually, I'd say their last 5 games since the Texas game, I think they only played 1 good game, and that was against Tennessee. I don't think they played very well against Florida. They got smashed by Ole Miss. I don't think they played very well against UMass, who ran for over 200 yards on them. And I don't think they played very well against Georgia Tech this past weekend. And you mentioned it. Georgia's defense has looked very worn out and vulnerable the last few games. And UMass and Georgia Tech both went over 200 yards on them. And that was with Jamal Haynes basically being banged up the whole second half of that game last week. So, and Texas's run game has kind of hit its stride. And if you watch last week's game against Texas A&M, if they don't turn the ball over twice in the red zone, that game's a rout. That game is not – like it was 17-7, but it wasn't, to me, as close as the score dictated, in my opinion. So I actually like Texas in this game, Bill. I've been saying it for a while. I'm sticking to it. Georgia has done nothing to prove me otherwise. I really feel like when I look at this Georgia football team that their win over Texas was a bit of an anomaly. I don't think Tennessee's that good of a team. I mean, they're good. They're, playoff team, but they're not a great football team in my opinion. I don't like how they're playing. I don't. And you look at, losing to Bama, they had a great game against Texas, but outside of that, any other team that's kind of been on their level has given them some problems. Teams that have athletes on the perimeter give them problems. Georgia Tech gave them problems with that. If you go back and study the film against Clemson had a lot of open receivers in that game that Cade Klubnik couldn't hit or couldn't protect. And that right there, that's going to be the difference in this game if Georgia Tech is going to win. Can they protect Quinn Ewers better than they did last time? That's going to be a big key. And a run game will help. But if they can protect Quinn Ewers, again, I'll say it again, this is a very vulnerable Georgia secondary that can be taken advantage of. And I think Texas has the weapons to do it if they can protect the quarterback. That's where I'm at on this one, Bill.
Yeah, I got Texas winning by a field goal, maybe 2 if you want to go under the spread. I think it'll be tight. It'll be dramatic, but I like the Longhorns to win, and I don't know what to do impact-wise. It's okay, yeah, there's some seeding moving. Texas could be 1. Georgia will probably fall a spot or 2. They'll fall to the 8-9 game and play Tennessee again. I'm not all that excited about it. It's normally the best of the conference championship games. I've seen this game already, and that's part of the, we may see it a third time, depending on the seeding. So we'll see. I mean, if Texas can go win that game and win in Atlanta, I'll be impressed. And I've been more impressed with Texas over the course of the season than most, because I think they've got a lot of good pieces there, and Sark's done a nice job with them. So I'll take Texas to win.
I think they've learned how to win when they don't have their A game.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't really learn how to do that till you play good teams. And the first really good team they played all year was Georgia. I think they're a different team right now. I do think Quinn Ewers being healthy, and I think Kelvin Banks being healthy are going to be big parts of this. I do. And I don't know if you had a chance to check and see what the injury status was for him going into this game. But it says he's practiced this week, according to Steve Sarkisian. So they think that it increases the odds that he'll be ready to go. So we'll see.
Who, Kelvin Banks?
Kelvin Banks.
That was, not having him would be not great, knowing that Jalen
changes
Walker,
things a little bit.
No, for sure. Jalen Walker was best player in the field in that first one, had 3 sacks. So we'll see if he plays.
I like Texas in this game, Bill. I'm actually going to kind of go back similar to what my score was last time. I'm going 31-21. I think here's something that we're not talking enough about. I don't think Texas or Georgia has actually been great in these big games the last couple of years, in my opinion. I don't think when they've played teams that are on their level, I don't think they've played great. You lost to Bama each of the last 2 years. You lost to Ole Miss. You did beat Texas. They've been a lot. I'll say this: they've been a lot more vulnerable in these games than they have been in the past couple of years, and I don't like the body language of their offense. I really don't. Now, here's the question I have, and we'll move on. I do feel like their offense started to figure some stuff out in the second half of the Georgia Tech game. Take away the officials helping Georgia and all that. Take that aside. Georgia still had to move the ball down the field and score touchdowns. And I felt like they started to find some answers in the second half with that offense. We'll see if it carries over this week against Texas. But I do like Texas in this game. I go 31-21 is where I'm going. So let's get into the last of these games, Bill. And this is number 17 Clemson at SMU. The Big Ten and the ACC championship games are both going to be playing at the same time. And I have a feeling a lot of eyes are going to be on this ACC title game because of the implications of the winner will have on the college football playoff. I think everyone in Tuscaloosa is going to be cued into this game because this game could have an impact on their seeding. So you've got number 17 Clemson, who's 9-3, who has lost to Georgia, Louisville, and this past week in South Carolina. They played 11-1 SMU, who has not lost since September 6th when they lost at home by 3 points to number 18 BYU. They have really, not every game has been dominant, but they've been kind of dominant against the ACC this year. When they play games, and in my opinion, Bill, and I don't know how many SMU games you've been able to sit and watch, every game I've watched them play, including a close win over Louisville, a close win over Duke, they were clearly the better team on the field that day, the more talented team on the field that day. I thought they outplayed Louisville. Now, I think Louisville was kind of having a Notre Dame after effect, which has happened to a lot of teams that played Notre Dame this year. But I thought SMU was the better team. Now that the moment's brighter, do we get the same SMU team, or does this Clemson team that has more players that have played in this type of game, right? A couple years ago, they were in this game. Does that help them, Bill? So let's talk about it. It's 8 o'clock on ABC, as I mentioned. SMU's a 2.5-point favorite, which I was all the spreads of the Power 5 games, 2, 2.5, 3.5, 2.5, pretty even spread or close spreads this week. But what are your thoughts on this game, Bill?
Yeah,
Tigers.
It's going to be a close one. It's going to be the game, like you said, a lot. I probably have higher ratings because of the factor that a lot of people in Alabama are going to be watching, and it's going to have impact either way. I mean, you got to take note that Dabo is 8-1 in this game, that it is close to home, that it is near Bank of America Stadium, or it's at Bank of America Stadium, and in Charlotte, and there's going to be a ton of Clemson fans there. I don't know. I still think SMU's a better team. And yeah, I have watched them. I watched the Louisville game. I watched early in the season, I watched the Nevada game. You wouldn't have been able to tell me they were a playoff team then because Preston Stone was playing quarterback. It was a slog. One of the big difference makers for them is Brashard Smith. He's been amazing in the second half of the season, averages 6 yards per carry. And Kevin Jennings is just a difference maker. So I think there's a high probability this could turn into a shootout. The ACC game has done that before. The Wake Pitt game, even that last year was not a shootout, but I like SMU here. I do. I think, that offense is good. Rhett Lashley's not getting enough attention. Clemson, when they struggle stopping the run. I do want to see how SMU reacts to Maffa in this Clemson power run game and whether or not they can make Cade Klubnik uncomfortable. But I think that SMU defense is a little bit better than we all anticipate.
Well, Bill, if you look at this SMU team, I like the fact that they've overcome some adversity this season.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about that Nevada game. I mean, the guy that bailed him out of that game, R.J. Maryland, who had some huge catches in the second half of that game, he's been out. I mean, he was their guy, and he's been out since the Stanford game, and they found ways to adjust. I thought that SMU started to wear down a little bit around that time. I really do. I think that Stanford game, not Stanford game, but going out to Stanford and then coming back to play the next week to play on the East Coast against Duke, you started to see some fatigue. But then they kind of go out after that and they rallied back. They blew out Pitt. That game was not as close as a score. Had a nice 10-point win over Boston College. And then you're like, okay, we're going to find out how good this team really is. And the last 2 games, they've obliterated their 2 opponents. I mean, just whipped their next 2 opponents. And Cal, that win over Cal was, and not a lot of people might laugh at me for saying this, but that win over Cal was a very impressive win because if you look at Cal this season,
they've been competitive all year.
Very competitive. I mean, they've got a 1-point loss to Miami, a 2-point loss at Pitt, a 5-point loss at Florida State. Horrible loss, by the way. 1-point loss to NC State, 8-point loss to Syracuse, who's a good football team, and then SMU just whoops them. SMU's playing good football. And the other thing, too, is SMU is a very stingy run defense that doesn't get talked a lot about. I know BC ran on them a bit, but they have held 7 of their 12 opponents this season to under 100 yards rushing. And they have held everyone except for BC under 150, only giving up 95 yards a game. You talk about Phil Maffa and all that, and I don't disagree with that, but they've played some teams that like to run the football, and they've shut them down. I think the bigger question is going to be, can Clemson do enough throwing the football for 4 quarters to win this game? Because you look at Clemson last week, I mean, they're coming out, they're throwing the ball down the field against South Carolina, and then they just kind of went away from it, and they just couldn't sustain it. You've watched Clemson now play, 3 good teams all year, and they just got beat by every single one of them, really. And I don't think this is a very good football team, to be completely honest with you. I think their 9-3 record is very inflated by the fact that they've literally played no one good outside of the 3 teams they've been. I mean, you could argue the only other team that they've played that has a winning record, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is Pitt.
Yeah,
right?
that was a good game.
And they needed a score at the end of the game to beat that Pitt team at Pitt. I mean, so they've played the 4 best teams they've played. They went 1-3 and needed a last-minute score to win that 4th game. I like SMU in this game. I do. I think SMU wins. I think there's a better chance that SMU wins by double digits than Clemson wins. But, of course, as soon as I say that, one of the other coaches who's pretty good at playing the disrespect game, Dabo Swinney, is going to have a chance to have a say in this whole thing.
He is, and they only had a combined total of 4 turnovers in those games against Georgia and Louisville and Pitt and South Carolina, but they don't force a lot of turnovers. So I think they need to force a little bit of a turnover. I am interested. I mean, they have the athlete, 4- and 5-star guys on this roster, and this is the best roster SMU's played. I mean, you could say it's Louisville, and that's fair. I mean, Louisville did beat Clemson, but from a guys that are going to play on Sunday standpoint, Clemson's got more of those. And that'll be an interesting test for SMU there. But, yeah, I think it's going to be highly entertaining. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the most entertaining game of the day. Outside, I do think Georgia and Texas could be really good, but I have it really close. And I have SMU winning by a field goal, and that would eliminate That now, and the other thing is if Clemson spanks SMU, that intensifies the Alabama SMU thing and probably knocks SMU out of the playoff.
You really think that they're going to – you said if Clemson spanks them.
Could happen.
Could happen, shouldn't happen.
Shouldn't
because,
happen,
again, of
good.
what we've heard Ward Manuel say, that these games, they're not going to punish teams for playing in these games. But we have found out that the ACC has a different standard applied to it than what is applied to the Big Ten and the SEC. That's just a fact.
And they should. In my opinion.
No, the standard should be the standard, is in my opinion. The standard is the standard. You can't say we're going to apply this to this league, but not this league. If for example, if you say, well, winning on the road matters, then winning on the road matters. It shouldn't be. It should only matter in this league because we have perceived this league to be better than that league. Like if you're not going to punish teams for playing in the conference championship, other than like moving them down a spot or two,
that's
but
what I'm saying. Yeah. No, I do think they're different. I think they are different weight classes, though. I do. I think the ACC and we probably don't have time to get into all this, but yeah, the AC. Like if this were high school football, which I love, if this were high school football in Indiana or Ohio, the SEC and the Big Ten are Division I, the ACC and the Big 12 are Division II, and the rest are D3.
I think if you're going to talk about here's the problem I have with that statement. That statement is built around what has been true over a period of time. It's not what's true this year.
I still think it's true this year. Clemson got beat by Georgia and South Carolina. Clemson.
They don't speak for the whole league. They also got their ass kicked by the only other.
They are speaking for the whole league. They're in the championship game. Like I just think the quality of play. Look at signing day yesterday. I mean,
that has nothing to do with who's good today.
It does though.
That's going to have to do with who's good tomorrow. Because otherwise, let's just put the teams that have the highest recruiting rankings the last 4 years in the playoffs.
I get that, but let's
put Ole Miss in there. Let's put Texas A&M in there. Let's just put 8 SEC teams and Notre Dame and 3 Big Ten.
But I've considered Notre Dame to be on the Big Ten SEC plane. I don't think. I think how many times you got to watch Notre Dame beat up on an ACC school, Brian?
Because Notre Dame's really good. But how many good SEC
those
teams?
ACC they don't play.
Who's the one good ACC team they played this year?
I don't know. Did they play a good one? Louisville touchdown.
They beat by a touchdown.
Yeah. But
we just saw Louisville
not a ranked ACC team because
they should be.
Right.
We just watched Louisville go into Kentucky and destroy Kentucky. Well, Kentucky's not good. Yeah, that not good Kentucky team beat Ole Miss, lost by a point to Georgia, was a field goal away from Tennessee until Tennessee punched in a late touchdown on the board. The only teams that really none of the top teams in the SEC whooped them outside of Texas. And that was a competitive game. None of the top teams in the SEC whooped Kentucky like Louisville did. And we can say, well, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it does matter. I watched Georgia Tech go down and beat your number 2 team and take them down to the wire. And if not for some just egregious officiating calls, would have beat Georgia at Georgia. And then Clemson, who's probably, in my opinion, the 3rd best team in the ACC, even though tiebreakers are giving them this and that, right? They're the 3rd best team in the ACC. Actually, tiebreakers didn't. But they had a softer league schedule, so they're in. Miami's the 2nd best team in the ACC. The 3rd best team in the ACC or SEC just went and beat a team that was comparably ranked to them in the or lost to a team that's comparably ranked. It was a very competitive back and forth game, right? And so when I look at the SEC, I think that we're doing a lot of this, what they have been, and importing that into what they are. I mean, look, we talked about this on our site yesterday, right? So the SEC this season has played 6 games against Power 5 teams with 8 or more wins. 6. They're 2-4 in those games. The only 2 teams to lose is Clemson has both of those losses. You had Miami smacking Florida, Arizona State smacking Mississippi State, who stinks. You had Louisville destroying Kentucky in a way that none of those other Big Ten teams could destroy them. And then you have Notre Dame beating Texas A&M. Right. And then some of the other wins they have against teams that have 7 wins, you have Georgia barely beating a 7-5 Georgia team. Texas smacked Michigan, and you have Missouri barely beating a 7-5 middle of the road ACC team in Boston College. That's a ranked team. All the wins that the ACC has or the SEC has, most of the wins they have are against teams with 7 wins or less. So people will say to me, somebody said to me, like, well, they got a better record against other Power 5 teams. Yeah, because they play garbage Power 5 teams this year. Like you said something earlier. You thought that who are we talking about? We're talking about Bama versus Miami. I think you said.
Well, that's not close strength
no.
of schedule wise.
You said they had a better out of conference win. Is what you said.
They did.
Who?
Their opponents in non-conference play had better record than Miami played Ball State.
Right.
Like they didn't play Wisconsin.
Okay, here's my point. They played Florida, who's better than Wisconsin. Right. Okay. They played the same South Florida team that Alabama played. So we're now
Ball State.
Right. We're now talking about, well, okay, let's look at what my point is. However, you said this. You said they had a better non-conference win. They didn't have a better non-conference win. You could say they had a better non-conference schedule. I think that's debatable.
That's what they did. Their opponents have a combined record of 19 and 17.
But that's not what you said.
But that's better than
they had a better non-conference win.
Right.
They don't have a better non-conference win. Miami had a better non-conference win. Like Florida is better, I would argue, than anyone that Texas beat in the non-conference. Now, overall, as I said, Western Kentucky's better than Ball State.
If you're trying to argue that the ACC is the
I'm not saying
it's
that.
Not even close.
I'm not saying that they're better than the SEC. But what I'm saying is when we get into these conversations, and you're going to try to tell me that the 4th best team in the SEC is better than the best team in the ACC, I don't accept that. I think if the Alabama, SEC, in some years that has been true. In this year, it is not.
I think Alabama has a better resume than SMU. I think if Alabama played SMU, they would beat them head to head.
That's irrelevant.
That goes into what they think. Like they have better resume than SMU. That's not debatable. Who has SMU beat?
Who has SMU lost to?
But that's what they look at.
No, but that's part. You see, this is what drives me nuts, Bill. Because every time a pro SEC argument gets made, they only want to talk about the wins and ignore the losses.
But that's how the committee thinks.
SMU has played a lot of teams. No, I don't care about the committee does. I'm talking about what your opinion was.
I did. I look at who you should drop. I look at who you beat before who you lost to, and
they should both be factored in.
But I know that loss against Oklahoma is really bad.
The Vanderbilt loss was bad also.
It's just bad. But I look at who they lost to last. And that's what the committee does. And that's what people don't understand.
No,
they look at your strength of schedule. They look at your strength of victory. And then they look at losses. And just because if SMU is 11-2,
you used Notre Dame's loss against them all year.
I didn't.
Yeah, you didn't. Though
I
didn't have them in the playoffs when you first started putting out.
Everybody had that.
You left them out.
That's a different loss. Losing to a conference team.
Well, you said losses don't matter when you've got all these good wins. We're going to talk.
We can't debate. Like losing to Northern Illinois was the worst loss of any playoff team.
Until Alabama got smoked by Oklahoma.
That's not losing to a 7-5 MAC team is worse.
No, it's home. Not.
It's
not
definitively
when you get
worse.
21 points by a mediocre Oklahoma team.
A bowl eligible team. So are you gonna?
So is Northern Illinois.
Oh my gosh! Like Northern Illinois and Oklahoma playing at home against Northern Illinois and playing at Oklahoma is not even remotely the same thing.
Well,
not even remotely the same thing.
I watched Mississippi State get beat worse by a MAC team than they got beat
by
anybody in the SEC.
That's not playing in Norman.
What we do. We always throw out the things that don't match our argument and focus on the
things.
But
so do you. So do you. We're talking about a MAC team. A MAC team.
A horrible loss.
It's the worst loss of any playoff team.
Alabama lost to Oklahoma.
I don't think those are even comparable.
Oh,
but
I
think absolutely.
But here's the thing, Bill.
Here's
you
the
just
point.
said you look at losses last, and you ignored all the things that Notre Dame had, all the good wins they had at that time, because some of the teams they played were still ranked and all that stuff, and you focused only on that loss. But when we talk about Alabama, you want to just dismiss three losses.
I'm not dismissing them. I'm just saying their strength of schedule and strength of victory is better than SMU's,
because
objectively better.
Perception of what the SEC is, not what the SEC actually is. That's my whole problem. This is the problem with strength of schedule. Strength of schedule is dictated upon what teams are perceived to be coming into the season. I just pointed out when you look at the SEC's results this year, the SEC was 2-4 against Power 4 teams with a pulse.
What does that mean? What is
because you look
with
at
a pulse? There's no heading with a pulse. Like, that's
any team that had 8 wins or more. They were 2-4 against those teams as a league.
That's like, so Alabama went up to Oregon. I could use that argument and say Alabama went up to Wisconsin and smacked them. Oregon barely beat them. Oregon barely beat them. So
they're 5-7.
What are we doing? Like, it's. I don't know. I'm going to stand by it, and I'm enjoying the comments on the side. We're not
talking about the best ACC team against the best SEC team. We're talking.
I just think the
SEC team, who's the 4th, maybe 5th best team in the league, should be in over the number 1 team in the ACC over the course of a season.
I just think the SEC is definitively better than the ACC top to bottom. And I don't see how this is an argument. Like Miami.
Because you're trying to make a different argument. What I'm saying is not that the SEC is better than the ACC. The SEC is better than the ACC, but not by the margin that people think, because all the opinions we have about the ACC are built upon Clemson looking like crap in 2 games, and then our perception of what the league is.
Oh, my perception of the league is
out of conference. They've looked pretty good.
All right, so by that logic, let's take SMU, Clemson, Miami, Syracuse, Louisville. That's your top 5 teams. Mm-hmm. And you match that up, and I know it's hypothetical. You match that up against Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina. The ACC is not winning more than 1 game. ACC is not winning more than one of those. That's. I just watched South Carolina win a team that might win the.
I just watched South Carolina beat Clemson. 8 overtimes.
But they lost.
Georgia.
They lost.
Well, yeah, they lost. They had officiating help.
No, we don't do that.
You watched the same game, Bill.
I watched the same game.
We're talking about quality
you had
teams.
8 overtime opportunities to win, and you lost.
Teams.
They lost them.
Right? And 8 overtimes. A middle-of-the-road, 5th or 6th best team in the ACC just took a team down to the wire. You just used 1 win is more impressive than another win. So
but you're using a near win. They lost the game.
No, what I'm saying is you're looking at the quality of the teams. When the ACC has gone out of league, they have represented themselves very well this season. Very well this season. With 1 exception.
SMU lost to BYU.
Yeah, who's a really good football team.
A 10-win football team. So we're like,
who's ranked number 18 in the country.
At some point, you have to be. They lost the games.
Yeah,
like Georgia Tech. You don't get a try hard.
You have to look at Alabama and say they keep losing games.
Right. I didn't say they did. I'm just saying. I'm just telling you what's going to happen. They will win that argument with SMU.
I don't care about what's going to happen. We know the ACC is going to get screwed. Right. You said you think they should fall out.
I do.
That's my problem.
I do. Well, I did. Like I said, I think the quality of and I'm not going to back down from the fact that I think,
Bill, I don't want to back down. We're having
the SEC and Big Ten. I think the quality of play in those 2 conferences is better and different than it is in the ACC and the Big 12.
Okay. I can agree with that and still say that the 4th or 5th best team in those leagues should not be getting in over the number 1 team in this league.
Well, if they're second, it's a debate. If they get beat by 30 points by Clemson, that will.
If they get beat by 30, that's a different conversation.
But if it's close,
hypothetical.
I would say if Clemson SMU is close, like the score that we have,
define close.
34 to 28, 34-28 either way. If Clemson beats them 34-28, I would lean toward keeping SMU in.
Mm-hmm.
I never said I didn't. I would probably do that, but I would also put in. I would say that they'll probably put Alabama in. They bypassed an undefeated Florida State for them.
I don't care what you think they will do. We agree on what they will do if it's a convincing loss.
But I think they should. They should put SMU
what I'm
in.
trying. But you keep going back to what I think they will do. What I'm saying is they should, and that's my. Right. I can't argue with Ward Manuel, but I can argue with you.
That's right. Well, I can argue with Ward too because they'll just give you an automated answer anyway. But right. I mean, like, I'm not gonna. Yeah, some of your commenters are calling me elitist. Okay, I accept that because I am. I would rather watch Texas and SMU or Texas and Alabama.
I don't mind elitist.
That's what the sport is.
My issue is this. I think your perception of who is elite is not accurate. Right? So like I am not one of these here just so we're on the same page, Bill. I am not someone who says that because they're the 1 or 2 in the ACC, they should be in over the 4 or 5 in the SEC. in general a rule. I don't agree with that.
Right.
I think it has to be determined by, well, how good is your league? There have been years where the SEC literally only had one team that would have been deserved to be in a 12-team playoff, and it would have been Clemson.
What are you basing that off of?
Well, off what? Off of?
That the SEC isn't better than it normally is. Maybe it is.
I watched the games. I watched them
play because there's not a dominant team.
No, because it's not about dominant team. Because if it was a dominant team, I don't think there's a dominant team in the Big Ten. I think there's 3 or 4 teams in the Big Ten better than everybody else, and that's why they kept beating up each other. I'm watching these teams in the SEC look like crap against not very good football teams, and instead of us saying that's a bad win, like how do you only beat that Kentucky team by a point? How do you give up 31 points to Mississippi State? How do you get worked on the ground by UMass? How do you get worked on the ground by Georgia Tech?
So Georgia. We're not talking about Texas here.
I think Texas is the best team in the. I think Texas is outstanding.
Are we talking about Tennessee?
I'm talking about everything after Texas is not definitively better than their counterparts in those other leagues. That's my point.
Okay. Well, I just think. I
think SMU matched up against Texas would lose to Texas. So if you're saying, like, let's take the number one.
They would. Okay? They would get hammered.
I don't think they'd get hammered. I think they would lose.
They would get hammered, in my opinion. Like Georgia would beat who's number 2 in the ACC. Georgia. Oh, we did see Georgia and Clemson.
Again, you're having a different argument than I'm trying to have.
But I'm
not saying, Bill. Listen, I'm gonna make it clear. I'm not saying the number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, if all stacked up, that the ACC would always win those games. I'm not saying that. I'm not arguing that the number 4 ACC team should be in over the number 4 SEC team. What I'm saying is that the top team in the ACC is better, or at least as good as all but maybe two teams in the SEC. Maybe. They're definitely better and more deserving than the number 4 team, because I do think SMU this season is a better football team than Alabama. And they've proved it on the field. I watch them play. I see the athletes. I see their defense. There's a level of consistency that is required by a football team. And I watch Alabama, and you say, look, if Alabama, we'd be having a different conversation, Bill, if Alabama was sitting here at 9-3, and we're talking about their losses being to, Georgia, Tennessee, who they lost to, and even if they would have gone on the road and lost to LSU, and now LSU's 9-3, we'd be having a different conversation about that 9-3 Alabama team. Which is why I give Georgia a little bit more benefit of the doubt than I give some other teams in that league, because at least Georgia's 2 losses were good losses.
Georgia's strength of schedule is
it's not about strength of schedule as alone. It's when they don't play well, they still win against bad teams. That's the mark of a good team. When they lose, they only lose to really good teams. That's my point. That's why I look at it a little differently than the other SEC teams.
Yeah, like SMU would be 8-4 or 7-5 against Georgia's schedule. Not even debatable to me. Okay.
I'm trying to talk about matchup of real teams. We're getting into this. Well, we're talking about. We're not talking about SMU being over Georgia. We're talking. I said outside of 2 teams.
Oh, I think SMU
worse than Tennessee's if they had their record. I don't think their record would be worse than Alabama's if they had their record. You're telling me they couldn't beat? So let's say they would have lost to Georgia. Right? So, like, if they had Alabama's schedule, they would have lost to Georgia. Let's say they lose at Tennessee, for argument's sake. And let's say they lose at LSU.
Who? Right? SMU? Oh, they would lose. Do you give them put their games up against Georgia's schedule?
And we're not talking about Georgia. We're talking about Bama.
Well, I think Alabama is better than SMU. I still do. Like, I don't even think I really don't, because
it's SMU. This is my issue. It's because it's based.
But you're acting like I don't watch them.
No, I'm not. Bill, I would never accuse you of that. What I'm saying is I think that you give certain teams the benefit of the doubt because of who they are, big picture, not who they are right now. Okay, that's the difference.
Maybe
that's where I disagree. And Bama right now is not a very good football team. That's my point. I do think SMU would have a 9-3 record. Maybe better if they had Alabama's schedule, because I don't think they lose to Vanderbilt. I don't think they lose to Oklahoma. I think they lose to Georgia.
Do they go down to LSU and win?
Possibly, but probably not. I think that'd be a tough place for them to win. That's why I said earlier, I think they, even if you assume that they would lose to Georgia, Tennessee, and LSU, they would have beat Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. They'd have the same exact record as Alabama.
Right.
That's what I think about that schedule. So, and I know you got to run, Bill. So This has been a fun, spirited debate. We won't be able to get into the college football playoff impact of these games, but we kind of did. We kind of did in those conversations, Bill. Let me just say this. I want to ask you this as you go. If Penn State loses to Oregon, do they fall behind Notre Dame no matter what, or does margin of victory have to be something like where it's Oregon's clearly better? What do you think the criteria would be for a Notre Dame or possibly even an Ohio State to jump ahead of Penn State should they lose to Oregon?
I think Penn State will fall to – the big question is basically Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State are all going to get home games. Mm-hmm. And Penn State, if they lose, the question isn't Notre Dame. Notre Dame goes to 5. Probably play Arizona State. That'll be a matchup. That one you can almost lock in if Arizona State wins. It becomes a debate between Penn State and Ohio State. Mm-hmm. Do they reward Penn State for playing an extra game? Penn State lost to Ohio State. They'll be 6 and 7. Georgia and Tennessee will play 8 and 9. And then you'll have Alabama in theory, which, by the way, they'll do for the network purposes. They'll put Alabama and Ohio State against each other. And
do you think they should drop behind Ohio State, or do you think they will drop behind Ohio State?
I think they probably – it's like 50-50. I can see both sides.
If it's a convincing loss, do you think it's a no-brainer they fall behind both of them?
Correct. So I think they're definitely behind Notre Dame no matter what.
Okay, so even if it's like a back and forth, Oregon wins with a walkout, you think no matter what Notre Dame moves them?
Notre Dame has one loss.
You think it has to be convincing for them to also fall behind Ohio State, though?
Yep.
Do you think there's any scenario where Texas beats Georgia by a field goal and they fall behind Georgia as well? Or do you think they both lose, they stay ahead?
Both lose, they stay ahead, probably.
Awesome. Bill, that was great.
All right, that was fun.
Thanks, buddy. Hey, everybody, we're going to be back. They're going to have an IB Nation Sports, so you can head off, Bill. I'm going to close out.
I'll see you guys. Hey, thank you so much.
We're going to have an IB Nation Sports Talk tonight at 5 o'clock. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I had fun. I love debating with Bill. He's a great guy to debate with because he will absolutely stick to his points of view. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed that. But we're going to have IB Nation Sports Talk tonight at 5. Tomorrow we're going to go live at 1 o'clock. Now, what I'm thinking about doing tomorrow is because we haven't had buy so hold yet. I'm thinking that maybe we might do like a half of a buy so hold and then half of a mailbag tomorrow, or we may just do mailbag and we'll do buy so hold at another time, maybe Monday. I'm not sure yet, but I would love some feedback from you guys on the board for tomorrow's show. Would you guys like us to do sort of a half buy so hold, a half mailbag, an only mailbag, or only a buy so hold tomorrow? So all of you that are board members, I would love for you guys to maybe go onto the board, have this discussion. It'll help me decide how we want to go, because obviously buy so hold got pushed back because of the signing day show. So I want to kind of get into that. And so, yes, Irish Gordon, and I do realize they're similar, but they're not the same. They're similar, but that's kind of why I want to ask the question about it. So go have that discussion on the board, and we'll figure out what we're going to do tomorrow. But we will go live at 1 o'clock. And a reminder that on Saturday at 10 a.m., we're going to go live and we'll preview the conference championship games with me, Trevor, and Vince on Saturday at 10 a.m. We'll go from 10 to noon. We'll have a better plan this time, so we won't go past noon to talk about that. So we'll recap Friday night's Mountain West and AAC games, and then talk about what those games mean and what they do for college football and the playoff and all that. And then we will then dive into the previews of the conference championship games. Our guys will have some thoughts on that. They'll make their predictions. I made mine today. They'll make their predictions for those games, and we'll have some fun. So that's going to be 10 o'clock a.m., 10 o'clock in the morning, Eastern time on Saturday for that conversation. So make sure that you guys join us. We may do that on the CFB Nation channel. I think we are going to do that on the CFB Nation channel. So you're going to want to make sure that you're subscribed to that channel as well. We're going to try to start doing more stuff on that. So definitely check that out. So that's where we're at. So anyway, everybody, have an awesome rest of your day. And I will talk to you all again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.